Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Imagine stepping off a time machine into 14th century Europe. The year is 1347. You enter a city that hums with life at first glance, but something is terribly wrong. The streets are slick with filth. Rats scurry through the shadows. Fleas and lice infest every home, every blanket, every scrap of clothing. And yet, this is just the beginning of what awaits. A sickness is spreading faster than fire in dry grass. They call it the Black Death, and in the years to come, it will claim between 25 and 50 million lives, half of Europe's population. In London alone, at the height of the outbreak, workers will bury 200 bodies every single day. Entire families vanish, streets become graveyards, fear becomes a constant companion. You are armed with knowledge. You know about germs, hygiene, and disease. You know how to wash your hands, avoid contamination, even administer modern medicine. But here in this medieval nightmare, knowledge is powerless. The world around you is designed to kill. Wells are contaminated, homes are infested, medicine is superstition. Even understanding disease cannot protect you. In this video, we will explore why survival was nearly impossible during the Black Death. We'll examine the deadly forms of the plague, the horrifying medical treatments, the collapse of order, and even how your own DNA might determine whether you lived or died. By the end, you will understand why the modern mind could not conquer the medieval body. Before we descend into this world of death and despair, subscribe to DarkMedieval. Hit the notification bell to join our journey into history's darkest disasters, and prepare yourself, because nothing you know today could save you then. The Black Death did not announce its arrival politely. It stormed across Europe like a silent predator, invisible yet unstoppable. Ships from the east carried rats infected with plague, and within months, the disease had leapt from port to port, village to village, consuming cities in its relentless path. Imagine arriving in a medieval town at the height of the plague. The air smells of smoke, sweat, and decay. Streets are crowded with people, merchants shouting, children playing, but death walks among them unnoticed. No one knows exactly who is infected. No one can escape it. The first sign is subtle: a swollen lymph node, a fever, chills. Then the coughing begins. Blackened skin, vomiting blood, agony. Contemporary chronicles describe the terror in vivid detail. In Florence, bodies lay abandoned in the streets. In Paris, families would lock themselves inside their homes only to succumb to death within days. The disease respected no boundaries. Wealth, power, or knowledge offered no protection. Entire neighborhoods disappeared almost overnight. And yet life carried on in the markets, in the churches, in the city halls, because people could not comprehend the scale of what was happening until it was too late. Even for someone armed with modern knowledge, survival would have been nearly impossible. You could identify the symptoms, understand contagion, even attempt isolation, but the tools needed to act were absent. Wells were contaminated, streets teeming with vermin, homes cramped and infested. Fleas and lice carried the plague faster than you could react, and every step outside your door risked infection. Some cities tried to respond. London attempted to quarantine ships, but it was too little, too late. Panic spread faster than the disease itself. People fled, unknowingly carrying death to new towns. Entire trade networks became vectors for the plague. Fear gripped the population, eroding trust and social cohesion. And yet the plague was indifferent to panic, indifferent to knowledge, indifferent to humanity. By the end of 1348, some towns had lost over half their population. And in those early days, no one could predict who would survive. Even the strongest and most cautious often fell first. The arrival of the Black Death was not just the beginning of a pandemic, it was the beginning of a world turned upside down. And for anyone caught in its path, it was a death sentence written in the very fabric of society. So, if you were standing in a medieval street, armed with modern wisdom, what would you do first? Avoid the rats? Flee the town? Wash your hands with what? In a world built for disease, your knowledge would barely scratch the surface of what it would take to survive. Next, we will examine the three forms of the plague, the three faces of death, and why each one was almost impossible to escape in medieval Europe. The Black Death did not come in one form. It wore three faces, each more terrifying than the last. bubonic, septicemic, and pneumonic plague, each with its own way of killing, each almost impossible to survive in medieval Europe. First, the bubonic plague, the most common form, yet no less horrifying. Infection often began with a small swollen lymph node, called a bubo, usually in the groin, armpit, or neck. Within days, fever, chills, vomiting, and excruciating pain would follow. And then the buboes would turn black, sometimes bursting and oozing blood and pus. Mortality rates ranged from 60 to 80%. Imagine witnessing a loved one suffering like this, helpless, as every attempt at care fails. Even your modern knowledge couldn't stop the progression without antibiotics. Next, the septicemic plague. This form attacked the bloodstream directly. Victims often died before symptoms were even recognized. The skin turned black from internal bleeding, limbs became necrotic. Death could occur within a single day. There was no warning, no chance to intervene, and certainly no way for medieval physicians to help. And finally, the pneumonic plague, the deadliest of all. Unlike the other forms, it spread through the air, coughing and sneezing from one victim to another. Mortality was nearly 100%. Infection could happen just by standing too close to someone who had it. A single breath could seal your fate. Even isolation was no guarantee if fleas or family members unknowingly carried the disease.
These three faces of death created a nightmare scenario. Streets, homes, and marketplaces became incubators for disease. Families isolated themselves, only to fall one by one. Entire towns lost half or more of their population in weeks. The plague was indiscriminate. It did not care if you were rich, poor, learned, or wise. Knowledge alone could not save you. Modern science tells us that some people survived due to genetic factors, like certain variants of the ERAP2 gene, but these survivors were rare exceptions. For the vast majority, exposure meant almost certain death. The Black Death didn't negotiate, it didn't wait, it simply took what it wanted, leaving horror in its wake. So, even if you had traveled back with modern knowledge, could you truly escape? Could you avoid the fleas, the lice, the contaminated water, and the invisible airborne killers? Most would find themselves powerless against the relentless progression of these three forms of plague. Next, we will explore the environment itself, a world built for death, and why medieval society unknowingly accelerated the spread of the Black Death. Medieval Europe was not just vulnerable to disease, it was built for it. Cities and towns were crowded, filthy, and teeming with life, but the wrong kind of life. Streets were narrow, lined with timber homes that trapped heat, moisture, and vermin. Garbage and human waste flowed freely into the roads. Open sewers became breeding grounds for bacteria, and wells meant for drinking water were often contaminated. Homes were infested with fleas and lice. Clothing was rarely washed, bedding often shared among multiple family members. The very fabric of daily life allowed disease to thrive. Every touch, every breath, every step could carry infection, and yet people carried on as if nothing was wrong. Markets remained crowded, churches full, streets bustling, because they could not comprehend the invisible predator among them. Even with modern knowledge, survival would be almost impossible in this world. You could understand germs and hygiene, but where would you wash your hands? Wells are contaminated, soap is scarce, and bathing is a luxury reserved for the wealthy. You could avoid contact with the sick, but entire communities are already infected. Airborne pneumonic plague spreads with every cough. Every step outside your door risks death. Intelligence becomes irrelevant in a world designed to kill. Consider this: the numbers. In Norwich, mortality reached over 60%. In London, workers buried 200 people every day at the peak of the outbreak. Entire neighborhoods vanished. The plague spread through homes, streets, and marketplaces faster than anyone could escape. Fleas and lice, more efficient than rats, carried the disease from person to person, from house to house, ensuring that the Black Death left almost nothing untouched. But the horror did not stop at disease. The collapse of sanitation meant that food and water became contaminated, allowing secondary infections to thrive. Families trapped in homes with the sick often fell victim themselves.
Even leaving the house was dangerous. The very world around you, your home, your city, your community, worked against survival. Medieval society was unprepared not just for the disease, but for the chaos it brought. Markets that provided food also provided fleas. Crowded homes allowed coughing, bleeding, and infection to spread unchecked. The streets themselves became graveyards. Every structural flaw, every social habit, every lack of knowledge compounded the death toll. So even with modern understanding of germs, hand washing, or avoidance of sick people, the medieval environment was almost impossible to survive. The Black Death was not merely a disease, it was the natural consequence of a world built for death. Next, we will explore the practices of medieval medicine, so-called treatments that often did more to kill than to heal, and why even the best knowledge would have offered little protection against them. In the world of the Black Death, medicine was more likely to kill than cure. Physicians believed disease came from miasmas, poisonous air, or from an imbalance of the body's four humors. Treatments were rooted in superstition, not science, and for the victims of the plague, these cures often became death sentences. Bloodletting was common. Patients were cut, their veins drained in the belief that removing bad blood would restore balance. But for someone already weakened by fever and infection, it only hastened death. Potions of herbs, often mixed with dangerous substances like mercury or arsenic, were prescribed. Some were instructed to drink their own urine or to ingest concoctions made from decomposing animals. These remedies did nothing but weaken the body further, leaving victims more vulnerable to the plague's relentless grip. Physicians were powerless. Even with modern understanding, you would have little to offer. There were no antibiotics, no sterile environments, no hospitals equipped to treat infectious disease. Seeking care often meant entering crowded spaces filled with the sick, increasing the risk of contagion. The very act of trying to survive might have ensured your demise. Chroniclers of the time wrote in horror about what they witnessed. Families desperate to save loved ones followed every medical instruction, only to see death arrive faster. Entire households perished despite the best treatment available. The cruel irony was undeniable. Knowledge alone was useless, and even the most well-meaning actions often accelerated the end. So in medieval Europe, the combination of deadly disease and deadly medicine made survival almost impossible. You could understand infection, sterilization, or antibiotics in theory, but without them, the Black Death was unstoppable. The cure was as dangerous as the disease. Next, we will explore the collapse of social order, the fear, chaos, and persecution that swept through Europe as the plague consumed communities. As the Black Death spread, society itself began to crumble. Fear became a force as deadly as the disease. Entire cities emptied as people fled, abandoning homes, markets, and even the sick. Trade slowed to a halt. Food became scarce. Law and order vanished as panic overtook reason. No one was safe, and no one could be trusted. Churches, once sanctuaries, could offer little comfort. Priests refused to administer last rites for fear of infection. Cemeteries overflowed, and mass graves became the norm. People who had survived the initial wave were haunted by the constant presence of death around them. It was not just a pandemic, it was a societal collapse, the fabric of medieval life unraveling before their eyes. Scapegoating became widespread. Jews, beggars, foreigners, anyone could be blamed for the plague. Pogroms erupted and mobs hunted those accused of causing the disaster. Communities tore themselves apart, violence spreading alongside disease. The fear of death drove people to desperation, and desperation often turned lethal. Even attempts to maintain public order failed. Town councils could not enforce quarantines, markets could not function, and basic services collapsed. Those who remained healthy found themselves isolated, hungry, and powerless. Social hierarchy offered no protection. The Black Death respected neither nobility nor clergy. It was the ultimate equalizer. Modern knowledge would have offered little here. Even if you understood disease transmission and hygiene, there were no safe spaces,
no effective quarantine, no clean water, no infrastructure to sustain you. Survival required not just health, but society itself, and society had fallen apart. By the time the worst waves passed, some towns had lost half their population, leaving a haunting emptiness in streets and homes. The collapse of order ensured that even the most careful, knowledgeable traveler was at the mercy of chaos. Death was no longer only a medical threat, it was a societal one. Next, we will explore the terrifying reality of the modern mind trapped in a medieval body. Why even intelligence and foresight could not save a person from the Black Death. You might think that armed with modern knowledge, you could survive the Black Death. You understand germs, hygiene, and disease prevention. You know about antibiotics, sterilization, and clean water. You could theoretically avoid infection, but knowledge alone is not enough. In medieval Europe, the very world itself was your enemy. Homes were cramped and infested with fleas and lice. Streets and marketplaces were filthy. Water sources were contaminated with waste. Even if you carefully avoided rats, fleas and lice carried disease faster than you could react. The environment worked against you, and modern knowledge had no power over it. Consider this. You know that washing your hands reduces infection, but where would you wash them? Wells are contaminated, soap is scarce, and bathing is a luxury reserved for the wealthy. You could avoid contact with the sick, but entire communities are already infected. Airborne pneumonic plague spreads with every cough. Every step outside your door risks death. Intelligence becomes irrelevant in a world designed to kill. Even with foresight, survival depended on more than cleverness. You would need medicine that didn't exist, infrastructure that didn't exist, and clean, safe living conditions that were impossible to find. Knowledge could identify the danger, but it could not neutralize it. Your modern mind was trapped in a medieval body, helpless, exposed, and surrounded by death.
So ask yourself, if you had traveled back, what would fail first? Your health, your precautions, or the sheer impossibility of avoiding infection in a world built to spread disease? For almost everyone, the answer was all three. The Black Death exploited every flaw of the human body and society itself, ensuring that knowledge without resources was powerless. Next, we will explore the science of survival, how genetics, transmission rates, and sheer luck determined who lived and who died during history's deadliest pandemic. Even in the midst of overwhelming death, survival was not always random. Modern genetic research reveals that some people survived the Black Death because of differences in their DNA. Variants of the ERAP2 gene, for example, appear to have offered partial protection against the plague. But these survivors were rare exceptions. For the vast majority, exposure meant almost certain death. Transmission studies also reveal a horrifying truth. Fleas and lice spread the plague far faster than previously thought. Rats were long blamed as the main carriers, but human ectoparasites carried the disease directly from person to person. Crowded homes, infested bedding, and filthy clothing all contributed to this perfect storm. Even careful avoidance was often futile. Survival required more than intelligence. It required factors entirely beyond your control. Mortality rates varied depending on the type of plague and the conditions of the town. Bubonic plague could kill 60 to 80% of the infected. Septicemic plague was almost universally fatal. Pneumonic plague spread through the air, killing nearly everyone it touched. In some cities, over half the population vanished within months. Genetics, location, and sheer luck determined whether you lived or died during history's deadliest pandemic. Modern knowledge could help you understand the disease, predict symptoms, and perhaps take precautions, but it could not rewrite biology, nor could it overcome centuries of environmental and societal neglect. The Black Death exploited every weakness: the human body, the human home, and the human society. It was a predator that no wisdom alone could outsmart. So when we study the science of survival, one chilling conclusion emerges. Even with foresight and knowledge, death is often unavoidable. Survival was not a matter of skill or intelligence, It was the mercy of genetics and circumstance. Next, in our final chapter, we will reflect on the lessons from the dead and consider what the Black Death can teach us about life, survival, and the fragility of human society. The Black Death leaves us with lessons that echo through history. It shows that knowledge alone cannot overcome the harsh realities of life without resources. You could understand germs, hygiene, and disease, but without medicine, sanitation, and infrastructure, survival was nearly impossible. Medieval Europe was a world perfectly structured for disease to thrive. Crowded streets, infested homes, contaminated water, and ineffective medicine created conditions in which the most careful, knowledgeable individuals stood little chance. Death was not just inevitable, it was systematic, almost engineered by the flaws of society itself. Modern genetics tells us that survival sometimes came down to DNA or sheer luck. Transmission science shows us how fleas and lice carried the disease faster than anyone realized. Yet with even this knowledge, one truth remains. In a world so hostile, the smartest, most prepared minds would likely have failed. The Black Death is more than a historical event. It is a warning. It reminds us that human progress is fragile, that society, infrastructure, and resources matter as much as intelligence. It challenges us to appreciate modern medicine, sanitation, and social systems that we often take for granted. So, imagine yourself back then. What would have ended you first? The disease itself, with its near 100% mortality? The filth? The contaminated water? The lice and fleas? Or the treatments meant to heal, which often killed faster than the disease? For most, the answer would be all of the above. If you found this journey into history's deadliest pandemic gripping, subscribe to DarkMedieval for more investigations into disasters that no modern human could survive. Hit the like button if you want to see more dark historical truths revealed, and leave a comment below. What would you fear more, disease, filth, or the deadly treatments of the past? History teaches harsh truths. The Black Death was not just a disease, it was a reflection of society's vulnerabilities, of our dependence on resources, and of the fragility of human life. By remembering the past, we understand the importance of progress, science, and preparedness, and perhaps gain a deeper respect for life itself. Thank you for exploring this dark chapter of history with us. DarkMedieval will continue to uncover the disasters, pandemics, and brutal realities that shaped our world, and remind us why knowledge alone is never enough to survive.